Okay, so just a review overnight from the replies about my XP versus gold. Arguments are dumbass number one, uh, something about liking my own posts. How does how does a guy who has so little following, but yet there's 50 people I see following this guy, and he's just a ugh, you didn't like your own posts, and they're not gonna like themselves. Okay, what an argument that is. Um, let's see. The Chiefs guy, I think it's Chiefs or Redskins. He's got an avatar. You're not old. 5 pages about why only people that agree with him are old school. No. Um, but there again, like the basic expert and other people were talking about, I just hate these labels because they're just argumentative and they just cause conflict. And maybe you're right. But walking lockstep with my twisted ideas of gameplay or game design doesn't, when I think of the term old school, when I saw OSR or somebody, I used to use the word old school before I ever heard the term old school renaissance. It was just that. I just was playing stuff from before. And to me, the old school wasn't worried about glossy photographs, wasn't worried about how to decimate a rule set into as small a package as possible. So you have to buy 15 $24 volumes instead of one $80 volume to get all the information. You know, things like Games Workshop. Basically, when I saw, I'm not necessarily attacking the game per se, I'm just using it as a milestone. When Magic the Gathering showed up, everything kind of evolved. And it evolved into a direction that I disliked and no longer was as interested in buying the products, was no longer interested in the way that they were being made or the design elements that were being put into them. So, and that I may be wrong about the exact year that Magic came out, but somewhere in the early 90s. I've set my cutoff point at 92. Now, there's some products I use that were printed after that, but they were printed for systems that were created prior to 1992. To me, that's it. When Wargaming started doing P500 and stuff like that, you know, and there was always people that talked about them being too complicated. Don Featherstone was ripping on Wargames Research Group back in the 60s and 70s as being too complicated. I always found those like, shut up, Don, talk about how you play. But, you know, anyway, um, so inside the you're not old school if you don't agree with me argument, there was this little nugget that said playing something out is a modern solution. And the absolute antithesis of that's just playing false. Chiefs guy is 100% wrong, no argument about it. Well, if you play out more, that's the old way to doing it. All that was done here was that somebody, Gary or whomever, decided that this is the part that is too tedious for gamers to play, or in our opinion, too boring to make them play. So we're going to skip over it. They may have, in some alternate dimension, it may have been encumbrance that they, because Lord knows enough people go, yeah, I love playing AD&D, but that stuff is math, and I'm not doing it. I'm not doing the logistics. And and then you got people who say, well, then you're not playing the game. You're full of shit too. Um, the whole rules is written or nothing is just there's no logic to that argument. It's just some weird fanatical, you know, that makes sense. So, um, but that's different than saying I'm going to absolutely reconfigure this game into something that it's not by totally not applying the rule. It's one thing to make adjustments and have house rules. It's another thing to throw the whole book out over your shoulder and say we're going to play this way instead. That's the difference. And taking that paragraph that I'm fussing over that people have put in my face and said, see, you got to read this. and saying no, all that stuff is extremely interesting and can be played out. Um, that's not fundamentally changing anything. That's just being more in depth and not skipping over a detail because it seems like a boring detail to you. You're perfectly welcome to keep playing that way. I don't like it. I wouldn't want to play that way. And um, playing it out doesn't mean that you're sitting on some stage with other actors acting out every action. I've said that 100 times, and people still straw man with that. Well, he just wants to play out training. No. Look, I put out I don't know if it came through, but because there was like a tower down or whatever the hell around here because there was electrical storms. But basically, all I said was, I went through the paragraph and it said, if you're a cleric, you should be doing this stuff, prayers and reading your books. Yeah, and wherever your party is camped for the night, maybe you should take a few hours if you want to advance. Take a few hours out of or minutes or whatever time you have, and just write down or indicate to the DM, I'm going to meditate or whatever, or say a prayer prior, before I go to bed, like I was a kiddie. I'm going to read through this book or whatever. I'm going to do something that is related and specify what it is. That's all. For this period of time, related to advancing my, my class or my skill. Big flippin' deal. That's all. That's all it is. And instead of saying, well, I stole enough gold that I can just pay my way through the next level or through the next, through 4 weeks of training or whatever it is. That's just glossing over it with you know, instead, and if you gloss over it, you're compressing time because you're not accounting for that time. At least curator says, yes, in my campaign, you'll be out for 4 weeks while you train. That's it, man. That's one for one. That's just taking care of it. Now, did you pay a bill for that training? Other than, well, it just magically came out of a pile of gold that I ripped off. And you don't really subtract anything. You just, if you subtract a portion of that treasure or your pocketbook for that, as opposed to, well, it's just part of, buying gear and training. No, here's your gear, here's your weapons, here's your training. 3 charts, 3 lists of prices. You pay it all. And then you say how much you're doing instead of making gold for XP. Because that way, if you find a way to just keep stealing from Smog, all of a sudden you're a 20th level whatever because you found a backdoor entrance into a pile of gold that you no. So I don't know. I think I covered everything. Did I cover the status thing? Some people are like, well, levels aren't about blah blah blah. They're about renown and all that. No, they're not. Look, you can be a legend in your own mind, and you can be a legend to the locals. But doing makes you a legend. Accomplishing feats make you a legend. Not stealing a bunch of gold out of a. Sure, the locals might go, whoa, it's a great story at a bar to hear about how you snuck one out from under a red dragon or whatever, sure. But the idea that no matter where you go in all these different dimensions and worlds that everybody knows you because I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. And being renowned isn't going to make you a higher hit point level. We were striving for realism. I think some people call it a simulationist theory or whatever. There's always got to be some overly flowery language. But yeah, making it just like in going back to the paragraph that people are throwing at me, with the quote realist. Yes, realistic. Yeah. That's what we're going for. When we were doing games in the 80s, we were looking for simultaneity, realism. And no, it didn't. All the cliches that came after it is the shit that I don't call old school. Well, that just made them impossible to play. They were unplayable. They were too complicated. Bullshit. All of that is bullshit. That's about selling more to more people. That's about expanding the customer base, largely. And people who come up with some old anecdote about how they Well, I played with my two brothers and we did Panzer Blitz and it took 4 hours and 20 minutes to play two turns. And maybe it did, but the details that they're likely not sharing with you is that they were chewing the rag for 45 minutes. They got pizza. Mom called them upstairs to take the car. All the other shit that went into the fact that it took that long. Or maybe they were ADD or whatever. You can mitigate the time it takes to play these. Does it still take a long time? Sure. Do you still, as an adult, might not have that time? Sure. But that doesn't mean they took too long or that they really fit into the hyperbolic, it'll take a week to play 5 minutes of combat. Bullshit. All that stuff is what I hate and I'm getting away from. And um, XP for gold is that kind of abstraction that I'm trying to get away from. It doesn't matter that it was constructed in the 70s. There's people doing that kind of abstraction. Charles Grant in the 60s still don't want it. We were Gen X. We were old school that way. We wanted to have everything gritty or granular or crunchy or whatever word you want. And and again, the fight is well, that makes it boring. Not if you do it right. Not if you do it right, it doesn't. It makes it interesting and in depth.